Greetings, everyone. This is Ahav Ever from the Chronicles of Ahav Ever, and today's topic is going to be rabbinical authority. What is it, and where does it come from? Now, this video comes from a number of videos that I've noticed on the internet, mainly from people who all identify as missionaries of one flavor or the other. One group of missionaries who 100% believe in the missionary theology concerning the New Testament, and one group who, for example, says that they don't, but they promote it as if they do. And I would say that it's basically the same thing. Now, one of the things I find common within most of the missionary concept is this idea that they have that there's this thing called rabbinical authority. And they kind of talk about it in a way as if, like, rabbis have somehow kidnapped what they call Judaism or kidnapped, the Torah and what it's really originally supposed to mean. And how somehow the things that they're saying in their videos are the truth of what the Torah says. Now, with pretty much every one of these instances, and these are just a few examples of what I've seen, I noticed that they, for example, stay away from actually going through the text itself of the Torah completely, and then showing exactly like, where they're saying something is off, for example. Most of what they're saying is off is based upon the missionary concept that they have of at some point in some way or the other trying to convert Jews to the ideas that are in the New Testament. Um, and most of that revolves around the idea that you have to kind of almost in some sense, I would say, as much as they would not say this themselves, you'd have to reject the Hebrew text itself and exactly what it means. And then you also have to ignore how one understands the Hebrew text at all, which I've covered in other videos. So what I want to do, because of the fact that this is the source of where some of these ideas come from, from this idea that there's this body out there called rabbis who are really not a part of the Jewish community, but they've somehow, controlled the Jewish community, and they've taken like some kind of authority that doesn't belong to them. For example, I want to address that, but the way I want to address it initially is something a little bit different than what most people would do. And that's to go and look at something in the New Testament, something that's actually written there. Now, I've done this before where I've taken a Hebrew translation of the New Testament. And because of the fact that the New Testament was originally written in Greek, there are no known Hebrew versions of the New Testament that are ancient, for example. In a previous video I did about these kind of topics, the earliest fragments of the New Testament are actually not full and they actually don't cover the full expanse of the Gospels, for example. I mean, the earliest full texts are usually going to be like the letters of Paul, for example. And then, like in terms of the Gospels themselves, they're the earliest fragments, I think, are maybe, I would say almost like 50 CE or a lot later. And then full texts come a lot later than that. But, in terms of there being a Hebrew text where, the original Jewish Christians, who disappeared about two generations after they started, they left behind no text that anybody knows of currently. So you can't really take a version of it in Greek and fully say, okay, I'm going to take this and try to understand the Torah from this because it's just a different culture, a different language, and anyone who reads it knows there's a lot of Hellenist thought within it that is like separate from the Torah. And we know that the Hebrew version I'm using now, for example, is a translation of a Greek text. So someone who was a believer in Jesus took like the Greek text and translated it into Hebrew. And I've done a few videos on this particular translation and the problems that comes up with it because of the terminology used in the Hebrew text. So what I want to do now concerning this issue of rabbis and the authority of rabbis and exactly the Christian perspective on what that means. I want to go to Matthew 22:2 in this Hebrew text, where it says the following. It says, Az diber Yeshua el hamon ha'am wa el talmidav. So it says here that Jesus like spoke to like the crowd of people and his students. Now, the first thing I would say is the New Testament never identifies exactly who these huge crowds were who supposedly were listening to Jesus during the time that he lived. Meaning that if these were such huge crowds, like the text says, you would expect that there'd be more than four gospels out there. There'd be like people who were not his direct students, that says like his Talmidav, his students, like, the 12 disciples, that there should be other people who wrote about, okay, there was this guy who said these things, he did these things, that someone else would have thought, okay, I'm going to write that down. Because what we know is if, the only new gospel texts we have are in Greek, what that means is that you would have had to have a highly educated Jew and Koine Greek to have written that. And from what the New Testament tells us over and over again, that his Talmidim, his students, were not educated. And that was one of the responses people often said in the New Testament. Hey, these guys aren't educated. What are they doing? Or, how are they saying these things, depending on your perspective. So That's one of the first things I noticed about this. But then it says further, and this is, saying that, okay, in front of all these crowds, it says, Amar lahem, so meaning that supposedly Jesus said these things to them. Hasofrim hapirushim, yoshvim ala kisei Moshe. So he says the sofrim, the, people like who, I guess you could say almost like um, in the Jewish community, there's nobody we really call Sofrim in this way, that the way it's used during this time period in that century. But you could say pretty much like the people who are experts in the text of the Torah. That would be like the implication that I would get from someone saying HaSofrim. Someone who's an expert in the written Torah. And he says Aperushim. So the Perushim, or what you call in English would be like Pharisees, for example. In the Hebrew of the day, they would have been called Perushim. Um, and basically, what that would mean is that it's like saying these are the people who actually understand the text. That would be like the best way to say it. During that time, one way that some people have kind of related to it is to say, okay, well, saying someone is a Perush or a Perush, the Perushim, would almost be like saying Orthodox Jew today. So Pirushim isn't like a party or a small group of people. This would be like anyone who keeps the Torah and the traditions around the Torah. So he's saying here that, the Sofrim, those who like know the text of the Torah, Pirushim, when it says Yoshvim al kisei Moshe, it says that they sit in the seat of Moses. Now, here's what's interesting. In the Tanakh itself, the written Tanakh, there's no part of the Torah that says, for example, that there's actual seat of Moses, a kisei Moshe. Okay, so one would have to say that he's being metaphorical here when he says kisei Moshe. So the kisei would be like saying someone's, the authority of Moshe. But there have been some Christians I've seen that have actually tried to say, well, there's an actual seat, and, that people sat in, and it was an actual the seat of Moses, literally. But I would say that this is something metaphorical, meaning that the authority of Moses. So if one accepts that this is supposedly historically true, and if one accepts that Jesus supposedly said this, he essentially is like saying, okay, well, look, the you know, knowledgeable people who keep the Torah, who live by the Torah, and if you want to add this to in a modern sense, the rabbis of the day, the leaders of the Jewish community of the day, and those who keep the Torah of the day, they sit in the authority of Moses. So this is a very clear statement that even in the New Testament, the author of this text, whoever authored it, because we don't know exactly who wrote Matthew, we know the original, like I say, was written in Greek. But I'm just looking at the Hebrew text, and I'll just, for the moment, accept that this is, authoritative on some level to someone. So he's basically saying that, the Torah-based Jews, the Torath Mosheh Jews of the generation, or the Orthodox Jews of his generation, and the rabbis of his generation sit in the authority of Moses. And he says, continuing, Lachen, kol asher yomoru lachem, alsu v'shimuru. So translating this would be, thus, because of the fact that they sit in the seat of Moses or the authority of Moses, everything that they say to you, and basically say to do it, keep it, guard it. Shimru means like to guard almost, to make sure you do it. And he continues in the non-highlight part, ach kama'asehem ala ta'asu. So like, basically like saying, their actions, don't do. Ki omrim hem ve'enom osim. Because he says, because, they'll say, something, and then they don't do it. So the way I would look at this is the following. Again, not saying that this story ever happened, not saying that I would accept something like this. Literally speaking, I would say if I was like a first time, Jew looking at this and never having heard this before, I would simply say, okay, well, wait a minute. He's saying that I need to listen to the rabbis of that day, or my day too. I need to listen to them because they sit in the authority of Moses. So because they sit in the authority of Moses, I need to listen to what they do. And, basically everything they say to do, I'm supposed to do it. So if my rabbi tells me that from the Torah, I'm supposed to put on tefillin every day. The people in English, Christians will call this phylacteries. But if I'm supposed to put that on in the morning before I go to the synagogue, I do it. Because if I were to accept that this is what I'm supposed to do, supposedly, according to, what supposedly Jesus is saying, okay, well, if he says that, then I have to go do it. If my rabbi tells me to put on tzitziot, my rabbi tells me to give like, a certain amount of my income, it's called tzedakah, or like, for charity and things like that. Those, I would do all those things. If my rabbi tells me, like, let's say, don't believe and don't follow these guys over here who are doing this New Testament thing, don't follow them, got to listen to that too. And the only caveat here in this particular section is if he's not doing what he's saying to do, then I don't do what he's doing, but I have to listen to what he says. So if my rabbi tells me to pray 3 times a day, in a group of 10 men, 2 Jewish men, but he doesn't do that himself. Well, I do what he says, but I don't act like him. So I don't say something and then like do something different. That's at the most the thing you could pull from this. And then even after when he describes these things, about, doing certain things, it's always going back to, okay, well, if someone who's sitting in the authority of Moses says for you to do something, do it. But if they're not doing what they say, then don't imitate their actions, for example, which is a constructive criticism that you could bring in anything. But here's the deal. I am quite certain that during his day, there were Sofrim and Pirushim who were actually saying one thing and doing the exact same thing that they were saying. So we can just eliminate the idea that like nobody was doing like what they were saying, and that's basically the criticism. Now the criticism is that look, there are people who sit in the authority of of Moses. They sit in the Kisei Moshe, so therefore what they say, do it. So if they tell you that something is like let's say oral Torah from Har Sinai, do it because of the fact that they sit in the authority of Moses. That's they're literally sitting. It literally says that right here. I could stop right here and say, okay, done. Don't need to read any more of this text. Done. You know, I could go a little bit further. Lachem kol asher yamoru lachem asu shimru. So they tell me to do something, do it. If a rabbi can show me that, okay, his source is coming from Mount Sinai about doing these things, according to this, do it. You know, if he's doing the opposite of what he says, don't do it. Don't imitate his ways, but still do what he says. If it's coming from the Torah, because again, Sofrim, Pirushim, that means something very specific. So getting to kind of sum this up, the New Testament author Matthew agrees that the Pirushim in the rabbinical author, the rabbinical authority, that's I should be authority here, comes from Moses. So essentially that we'll see what rabbinical authority even means. And again, I'm sorry that I didn't put the authority here. Sometimes I'm rushing to make a video and doing it in English and trying to go back and forth to Hebrew sometimes get mixed up. Comes from Moshe, and B, that Israelis and slash Jews must do what they say. So we'll get into this in just a second. Well, what does this relationship mean? Is it simply that a rabbi tells me to do something and I just do it? Like a rabbi tells me to jump off a bridge, I jump off a bridge. No, of course not. Because that goes against other areas of the Torah. But if a rabbi's instructed me in the Torah, and if he has sources for what he's saying, then of course I hold by those things because I'm a part of the Jewish community. I'm not outside of it. So now what we want to do is discuss something that one of the missionaries that I recently listened to mentioned. He was kind of alluding to this idea that he has personally that the Torah never puts into place a structure of people who are teachers of the Torah, which was kind of a strange thing. And I hope I misunderstood what the person was saying. But essentially, what he was kind of saying was that the rabbis don't have authority. It doesn't come from the Torah. In his wording, it's not biblical. But of course, the word Bible is not Torah based either, because the word Bible is a foreign term, and it means something different usually to people who use that term specifically in the Christian world than it does to people who go by the Hebrew Tanakh in Hebrew. But essentially, I want to go through and say, okay, what does the Torah say about teaching the Torah and teaching what is, the traditions around the Torah within the Jewish community, within the Israeli, slash Jewish people. And if it ever says that there's any group of people who is, who have been put in place to do that teaching, if you will. And what exactly does that mean from an etymological, meaning the etymology of the words themselves? Because this is something I see lacking whenever missionaries come and say these things. They never show the etymology of the language in Hebrew or in Aramaic to prove what they're saying. So that's what I want to do, right now. So before if you want to kind of, before you get too deeply in this video, I have a playlist I started called Proof That Rabbinical Jews Keep Torath Mosheh. And what I basically did was I gave a list of videos that I've previously made that actually address these concerns that I'm mentioning from different missionaries. And it's like I said, it's a number of videos. Some of them are long. But if you're looking for exact facts and details, historical, textual details, I break down the text themselves rather than just simply telling you in English a text says something and then flashing the Hebrew in front of you, knowing that you can't read it for yourself if you don't know Hebrew, for example. And also, um, you know, this topic of rabbis, I've covered this in different areas where I go into like, this video here, for example. Actually, let me put my pointer on, my annotate on, so you can actually see where I'm pointing at. So, for example, this video I did here concerns about who are the correct teachers of the Torah and and Torah leaders, and I go through the text as always and what to follow, who to follow according to the Torah, what it says, and what the Tanakh says about who you're supposed to follow, when they present information to you, and if the Jewish leadership that it exists currently in terms of rabbis who keep the Torah, I go over that too in terms of who's who. So these are good videos to watch along with this video here. Okay, so for the first thing we need to do is go through what I said earlier, etymology. We want to learn, okay, well, what terms does the Hebrew text use to deal with people who are teachers of the Torah? And, and the reality that I get at all the time is the Torah talks about two different things here in terms of someone who is a teacher of the Torah. It describes them as a leader amongst the Israeli/Jewish people because leaders are people who are also teachers. So there are several terms used. One of the earliest terms is zakanim. Okay. Usually it's translated as elders, but it also is basically dealing with people who are leaders within the Jewish community who either because of their age and knowledge base or simply because they have the leadership skills, but they're called zaganim. Okay. And the next term, nasi'im. Nasi'im, or like, someone who's kind of like the root of the word is something that's lifted up. So it's like saying those who are also, again, lifted up leaders within the community. The Torah usually often uses this term to describe people who are the leaders of the tribes, the leaders of the tribes and leaders with subset groups within the tribes. Okay. So these are people who are like, lifted up, if you will. That's one of the etymology of the word itself. Sarim. Sarim are kind of people like either who serve a certain rulership in one sense, but then also in another sense, a sar is also someone who's a leader, and then a teacher also. Um, one famous, one term that's often used in the Torah in different places is sar tzava. So it's like the leader of the army, for example, but as also the instructor of the army, because what does a leader of the army do? They instruct people on what to do and how to actually perform, and then they have people below them who instruct and inform. Another one is Rosh Levet Avotov. So this is used generally in Bemidbar, in the book of Numbers, to describe the head of like a household. So the heads of household are also denoted as leaders as well as teachers of the Torah within the Torah. And there's several places where the place where it actually mentions the Bemidbar, it actually makes it pretty explicit that the Rosh Levet Avotav is someone who instructs those who are within that household. So then pikudim. Pikudim is also a type of like leader, and then also one of the words to describe it is hora'ah, meaning like instruction. So these are terms that have a common basis in etymology, dealing with leaders and instructors in the Torah. That's the etymology. Now, the thing that people sometimes don't realize is that languages evolve, and terms you use to describe things evolve. So that means that at some point, if you look early enough in the Torah, and given the Torah is a text that kind of covers thousands of years of history, and the Torah is not always written in a straightforward manner, meaning there's some events that are mentioned in the Torah that are happen earlier but are mentioned later. And that's because of the fact that one of the ways to look at the written Torah is that it's the commentary of the Creator of all things to the Israeli/Jewish people. So it's written in a format that there's instruction and lessons to be learned from even how it's written and how things are described and when they're described later or earlier, for example. So the thing is that at one point Zekanim would have been, was a term used quite often, and then Neseim, as the Israeli people progress, also the word Sarim is used in different places, and Rosh Levet Avotov is used in different places in Pikodim. So that means that over time, as generations move on, there are different terms that are used to describe sometimes the same things as earlier terms. So the word rabbi or rav, which is the short version of the word rabbi, is the same thing. Just because you don't see the word rabbi in the book of Bereshit, in the book of Genesis, doesn't mean it's an invalid term. And just because you don't see it in certain places in the Torah itself doesn't mean it's an invalid term. It's just simply describing the progression of the language of the same types of people, meaning leaders and instructors in Torah. That is the basic terminology we're describing here. So let's look at something that's very interesting because often when people talk about ravs, I think one side of it they're trying to say that, oh, well, the word rabbi or, which the word rav in rabbi are pretty much the same term. Rabbi can either mean my like rav, or it can mean like, someone who has a certain type of like smicha. But it's generally a term in English that's used to describe the same thing as Rav in Hebrew. Now, interesting enough, if you look up the word Rav in like what do you call it, a lexicon or any kind of like text that deals with like ancient Hebrew, the Tanakh, what's in the Hebrew Tanakh, you'll find that in one scenario, for example, the word Rav is describing what we looked at earlier, the word Sar, which a Sar is a type of leader or someone who's been assigned to be a certain leader over certain areas of government as well as like instruction to the people. And also it's used described as the word katsim. So katsim is also a type of leadership that's used in rabbinical texts, for example. Now, interestingly enough, when you look through different areas of the Nach, like the Nevi'im, the word Rav is used in the same sense that I'm talking about now in terms of leadership. So, for example, in Melachim Bet, which is Second Kings 18, verse 17, the term is used when it says At Taroton wa et Rav Saris. So this is a type of leader of particular group of people, for example. It's also used a little bit later in Second Kings, to describe, like in a Rav Tabochim. So it's like the leader of, for example, in some cases, the Rav Tabochim is like someone who deals with certain elements of like executions and things like that, but it's like the leader of like these things. And it's used a number of places in the Tanakh, like in Yirmiyah Yehu, where it says Sarasachim, Rav Saris, and then like it says, Rav Saris and Yirmiyah in several places in the book of Yonah, it says that there is a Rav HaHovel. So basically, it's like saying that this is a leader of something, a leader of something. For example, in the book of Esther, in chapter 1, verse 8, it says, Yisad HaMelech ala kol Rav Beto. So it's like the leader of like household, So this term again, is used in both Hebrew and Aramaic to describe someone in a leadership position. In ancient Semitic languages, leadership and teaching slash instructing were interconnected. So what this means is that a leader isn't just some guy who sits aloof and doesn't do anything but just kind of tell people what to do. This is someone who instructs people what to do. A king, the purpose of a king is partially instruction, to tell people what to do and to lead by example. The point of someone being a judge, for example. The word shofet, or, which also in Akkadian, shafat, I think it is also dealing with leadership and not just specifically someone who sits and says, okay, this is the judgment here. I rule in favor of this person, that person. It's also someone who teaches and is a leader. So this is something that is important to note, that the word rav, from which the word rabbi is derived in English, and also like in Hebrew, or, which in certain parts of Hebrew it's called ribi, which is similar to the way it's spelled here, but this is rabbe. Essentially this word comes from the Tanakh. So it's understood to be a leadership, kind of position, which also includes teaching. So now let's look at what the Tanakh says in other areas concerning the idea of this idea that is there really a situation in the Tanakh where there's a class of people or a group of people who are supposed to like teach the Torah, or is it just everybody's on their own and everybody does whatever they feel is right? So in the book of Deuteronomy 11:18 through 19, it says the following: "Wasamtem ath devorai elah al levavachem wa al nafshechem uksharatem othom leot al yadachem wahoyu letot for the and then, translating this is Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses talking to the people of Israel, and he's telling them that, the words that he's basically been teaching, like his instructions, if you will, we're supposed to put it on our hearts and on our souls, and to bind them as a sign to our, hands, or, understanding that this is talking about what's called tefillin, or, people call it in English phylacteries. And wahayu letotaf benechem. So one is supposed to be on the arm, one's supposed to be the head, and this is basically a mitzvah so that the people of Israel will have a physical example of the words of Hashem, since inside of Tefillin, the words of the Torah are written inside of them, and they're placed on the head and also on in the arm. And the reason is because it gives a physical example to do something. And I talked about this in another video, where the word uksharutem means to bind or to tie. So it's something physical, not like a metaphorical thing. There are Karaites who say that they believe it's metaphorical, and also the Samaritans say that. But then there are like a very small group of people, and the vast majority of Torah-based Jews and ancient Jewish communities have said that this is like that. At least I will say it like this: in the Jews who actually put something physical on and do something with this, you can say that when the Torah was given at Mount Sinai, and then like as the Moshe Rabbeinu taught different groups of people, we can at least say that our ancestors were at the lessons where Moshe Rabbeinu said to physically do something. Anyone who says that they weren't, they'd have to say for themselves, my ancestors were at different lessons or at those lessons, and he didn't hear that. But again, that's a minority of people. So going on a little bit later, it says, "Walimathetem otham ath benechem ledaber bom." So this word and word here, "walimathetem," means to teach or instruct. Otham, to teach them, your sons, ledaber bom. So you'll speak them. So this means that you will orally teach them, the instructions that Moshe Rabbeinu gave orally, because it says ledaber rabam. It doesn't say take a text, put it in front of them, and make them read it. It says ledaber rabam, to speak to them. So this means that a father, and also one of the Jewish understandings of this is that it's not just a person's father, but benechem also can mean your students. So for example, a person's students could be considered their their sons. For example, "B'shivtecho befetecho v'lechtecho v'derech u'shoch u'gomecho." So what this means is like even when I'm sitting at home, sitting in my house, and when I'm on my way, like on the path, or when I'm basically lying down, and when I'm getting up. So this presents a situation where this obviously is telling us that there's oral instruction that's going on here, and that there's an instruction for people who are either fathers or leaders of households or communities to teach the Torah. So we have a very clear instruction That is, to be orally taught, for example, and instructed. So then when we go to Deuteronomy 16:18 in the book of Devarim, it says the following, Shoftim v'shotorim, titen lecha bechol she'arecha. So the green, shoftim, is like judges, or as we said before, the word shofet can also mean like a leader. Shotorim is the type of people who would be, for example, those who enforce the actual like rulings and the laws. So shoter in modern Hebrew is like a police officer. So there are police officers who, for example, will, say, okay, I'm enforcing the law. But as a part of that, they often will teach people or tell people what it is that the person is doing wrong. So there are some police officers who, instead of giving you a ticket, will simply tell you, well, the law says this, you did these things, and they're instructing you. Because again, it isn't just a matter of, okay, here, take this ticket, go to the court. I'm not going to explain anything to you, get out of here. There are some police officers like that. But there are police officers who will maybe give you a ticket, but also explain where you went wrong. So as a good example, I once got a ticket when I was living in New York, and it was because I had parked on a certain side of the road, and I was 2 minutes late, and I was telling the police officer who was giving me a ticket, they're actually processing the ticket right there. And I said, but I'm only 2 minutes late. And she was saying, well, I'm sorry, I understand what you're saying, but the law says that the minute I start this ticket, I can't stop. So what she was doing was instructing me on how the law works. I received a ticket. I had to either pay it off or go to court about it, but I understood for future reference that I couldn't be 2 minutes late, even 1 minute late, and that the minute they start the ticket, they couldn't stop because of the law. This is what is, this is literally when people try to ignore that all of these positions are teaching positions as a part of like being, these official positions. This is a part of it. Teaching is a part of these positions within the Jewish context, especially thousands of years ago and even today. But here's what's interesting further concerning the shoftim and the shotorim, these judges and these officers, if you will. It says the following in yellow, Titen lecha bechol she'arecha. The red Titen lecha means the Jewish people, we're supposed to appoint these people upon ourselves. So we're supposed to give ourselves shoftim and shotorim. So again, this goes back to this whole idea. If someone says, okay, well, the rabbis, have the authority of the rabbis. Well, the Jewish community is the ones who we're the ones who give the rabbis authorities to be shoftim or shotorim. That is what the Torah tells us to do, and it says to do it where? Bechol sha'arecha, in all of your gates. So then it continues, it says, Asher Adonai Elohecha noten lecha, lishvotecha, v'shofatu et ha'am mishpat tzadak. Now here's what's interesting about this. Because it says further, it says, which Hashem will give to you, you know, to do judgment, lish votecha. So they'll be, being judges over us, because we gave them the position to do that. And all societies need leaders to be judges. All societies need justice. So it says, v'shoftu et ha'am. So they will judge the people. That's literally what this position is that we're supposed to give to ourselves, people who will judge over us, and people who were, basically teach us through judgment. So, for example, you can go to court. There's some judges who may say, okay, I'm not going to actually push this case all the way through, but you need to know these things. There are judges all over the world, even outside of the Torah, who have no problem instructing people on what the right way of thinking is and try to help them. I once saw a judge on TV, on YouTube, sorry, who is pretty famous on YouTube, for example. And there was a guy who was telling me at one point, like, look, I have a kid and all these charges that I have against me right now, I don't have the ability to pay it off. So just put me in jail for the weekend or so, and then I'll just go to jail. And the judge could have said, okay, fine, I'll do that. But the judge instead stopped and said, look, if you need help trying to figure out how to pay these things off, talk to this office here. They will help you figure out a payment plan for you. And then he said, your son needs you. Your son needs you on the weekends. So don't throw away your freedom. He said, there's too many people who have fought and died for you to be free, for you to like give it up and just say, I'm not going to even try. Your son needs you. Now, he didn't have to say that, but this is the role, even according to the Torah, of a shofet. A shofet or a shoter are instructors in Torah. Their job is to judge based upon it, but part of the judging is to instruct. The idea is if there's let's say a difficult issue, we don't want the same person coming back with these difficult issues over and over again. We want to instruct them and get them past that. That's the job of a judge. So the same way this example I gave, it's the same thing. Like, okay, this person has been stealing, or this person's breaking the Torah here. We want to instruct you past that so that you're not continuously in the court with these issues. This is the part of the being a shofet of the people. To like mishpat tzedek, to do like judgments, according to like, correctness, for example. So if we go to Deuteronomy 31:19, it says, "Wa'ata kitvu lachem et hashirah hazot walamado at bnei Yisrael." So what it says here is this Moshe Rabbeinu giving instructions where he says, and now, wa'atol, kitvu lachem et hashira hazot. So there's like a particular thing called a shira. Shir is used like a song, but there's a section of the Torah called Ha'azino, which is known as a shir, but it's actually a type of instruction because there's things in it that it describes that if the people of Israel keep the Torah correctly or incorrectly, it describes what will happen, for example, and then at some point how Hashem will when Am Yisrael decide as a nation to turn back to Hashem, that Hashem will turn back to us. So Moshe Rabbeinu is telling the people so that basically, lamado means to teach. Eth b'nei Yisrael. So someone is supposed to teach Bnei Yisrael. This is not Moshe Rabbeinu doing it himself because he's about to pass away soon, and he's instructing for the future that for this song to be written down by basically the leaders of the people of Israel, and that they will teach, it to the people of Israel. And it says, "Simo the Thiham," place it up in their mouths. So you instruct them so that they'll be able to like also say it themselves and instruct. It isn't just simply that they get together and they start singing a song, and that's what it's meant here. Because okay, well, all we have to do is learn the song and sing it. That's it. That's all we're supposed to do here. Of course not. So it says Lama'an tiyuli hashira hazot le'ed bivnei Yisrael, and that actually explains what I'm. This part here now actually explains what I'm saying. It says on account of it will be like to me to like this that basically is like saying this will be like this song will be a witness to the people of Israel. So essentially teach them so that they know this song. So they have to teach it to them, and teaching is explaining, what does this word mean? I mean, again, all of these words here that you see me like translating, if you don't know Hebrew, that means that someone didn't orally teach you these things. But I had to learn it for myself, and I had to orally learn it from people because, again, how would I know how to pronounce this if someone didn't orally teach it to me? So there was people who had to orally teach me how to understand this, and when I had questions, okay, well, what does this mean? How do I pronounce this? Is it walamdo? No, it's walamado. That's how you pronounce it. For example, is this sima? No, simo. So it means something when when it's pronounced correctly versus not being pronounced correctly. So this is the thing that this is supposed to be a witness to the people of Israel, and it's an instruction. So this means that there is a class of people who've been told to teach, and those are the people who know already. So then if we go a little bit further into the book of Chronicles, Second Chronicles, 17, chapter 17, verses 7 and 9, it says the following: Uvishnat shalosh lamolocho, shalach lesorob, leven hayul, ul ovazio, lizcharyo, ulinathanael, ul michoyohu, lelamed be'arei Yehuda. So this means that the king in the third year of his reign sends his sarov. Sarov is like saying his sarim. Sarim, we said earlier, like his officials, the leaders, the teachers of the people. And he says like to basically the Laven Hayil. He names off several people that are supposed to go out, several men that are specifically assigned to go lelamed, to teach be'arei Yehuda. Where are they supposed to teach? In the cities of the region of Yehuda. So in the region of Judah, as people say in English, these men, Ovadio, Zechariah, Wilinthael, Michoyahu, the king is sending them out to teach, Lelamed. So this again means that there are some people who are in leadership positions, who are teachers, who are sent out to the places to teach people. And it continues in verse, this looks like I mixed up a little bit here, but yeah, it looks like, yeah, 17 and 9. That's correct. It says, "Wa'lamodu bihudo ve'imaham sefer Torath Adonai ve'yosovu bechol are Yehuda wa'lamadu ba'am." So it says that they basically started teaching in Yehuda, and it says with them they took the sefer Torath Adonai. So they took the Torah of Hashem, and they went around, all these different like cities of like Yehuda, and they taught the people. So again, one person can claim, well, all they did was take out the Sefer Torah and just read it. They didn't do anything else. No, it tells us that they were teaching. The lamadu doesn't mean to just read. If it was just a matter of them reading it, it would have said that they would have karu'u Sefer Torah lekol ha'am. But it says lamadu, means that they taught. Teaching is not just reading, it's instructing and it's explaining when there are questions. That's the reason why when you go to university, Most good instructors don't sit there and just read a book to you. They actually explain what the book says because often when you read a book, there's questions. Okay, what does this mean exactly? How do I practically do this? I did a video about this once where if all this was is just about reading a book, somebody could, professor could just say, here's the book, go order it. And then in about a couple of months, come back and I'll give you a test and you'll be done. You'll understand everything. But obviously, and I've had instructors who've done things like that before. When I was an engineering student, electrical engineering student in America, I had instructors who 100%, here's the book, basically read it, or they would read the book to us and wouldn't explain anything. And I had to find ways to get the deeper instruction because there were times where the book wasn't clear, or because of the fact that, I'm not at the level to understand it that this person is. I want to know more. I want to understand how this works exactly. So here we have a longer section, and when it comes to Chronicles 2, um, this is basically, I didn't put it here in the English, but it's 19, verse 19, starting 4, verse 4, and then basically going to almost, yeah, going to like 19, verse 10. So what it says is the following: Vayeshev Yehoshaphat b'Yerushalayim. So the king of Jerusalem at the time was Yehoshaphat. It says Vayoshav vayetzev va'am mibe'er shava ad har Ephraim washivem al Adonai Elohei avotehem. So it's describing, when basically, the people of Israel, people of Yehuda, are, following the leader Jehoshaphat, who's the king of Yehuda, the region of Judah. And it says specifically in the green, it says, "Wayamed shofatim ba'aretz." So he basically established shofatim in the land, judges in the land. And it says, "B'chol arei Yehuda betzoroth la'ir wa'ir." So basically, he established in every place he could, you know, judges, to be like, teaching the people, leading the people, and doing judgment, for the people. And it says, "Wayomer ala shofatim." So he says to these judges, "Ro'u ma'atem osim." So you like, it's almost like saying like, look at what you're doing, or almost like, kind of be aware of what you're doing. Ki lo la'adam tishpatu. So it's like, basically saying ki la'adonoi, that judgment doesn't really belong to any person, it belongs to Hashem. So by them taking on these positions, they're doing the work of Hashem. And it says, imochem be the varab mishpat. So, like, with you is the words of Mishpat. So he's sending these people out to do the will of Hashem by, being judges or ruler or like leaders of the people. And it continues, says, "Wa'ata yehi pachad Adonai alechem." So the fear of Hashem shall be upon you, because again, if you're a judge or a leader amongst people, you have to have the fear of Hashem to be able to go out and judge, properly. Shimru wa'asu ki en im Adonai Eloheinu avalo u'masofanim migach shohat. So it's like saying, okay, make sure to take your position very seriously, because Hashem, you can't like bribe Hashem. The will of Hashem has to be done correctly. So it continues in the blue and says, "V'gam beYerushalayim amid Yehoshaphat min ha'luiyim v'hakohanim u'meroshe ha'avot leYisrael." So it says, and also in Jerusalem, he appointed, from the tribe of the Levites and from the Kohanim. And it says, and, because there's some people who try to say, well, the Torah only tells us that we're supposed to follow the Levim and the Kohanim. No, no, no. It says here, he appointed judges from amongst the Levim and the Kohanim. And it says, and, umeroshe ha'avot liYisrael. And also from the heads of like the fathers of the households, if you will, basically the Rosh Ha'avot means like the head of, the fathers, which is meaning like the leadership of the people of Israel, people who are respected as leaders, Li Yisrael. And then it says Lemishpat Adonai. So basically doing the judgments of Hashem. Waloriv Wayoshuvu Yerushalayim. So essentially, you have a situation where he's establishing courts, even within Jerusalem itself, amongst not just the Levim and the Kohanim, but also like people who are respected amongst the people. Whenever the term avot is used in ancient Hebrew, it either means like your ancestors, or it means people who are like the head of something, who are like the leaders of something. It doesn't always mean just like your fathers. It means also someone who's like considered a leader. Because there are some situations where a person can be such a leader to the point where someone's like, that's like my father. This guy was like a father to me. And there's some people could say, well, my father wasn't as involved. This person was like a father to me, and I'm treating him as if that's my father. And the person can say he's like a son to me. It's no different than that. Then it continues, says, "Watsav alehem lemor." So he commanded them, or it's also like watsav can mean to command as well as instruct. Alehem lemor, to them, basically the same, on them, to say, Kol ta'asun biyirat Adonai. So basically, thus, or like, you will do, according to the fear of Hashem, or the awe of Hashem. Be'emunah uvelev shalem. So, basically with, like, having a right perspective, about, what the truth is, and having like a full heart. And it says, "V'chol riv asher yavo alechem me'achachem hayoshavim ba'arehem." So essentially, one of the things they're supposed to deal with is any conflicts that exist between their brothers, our, the people, who are in the cities. Ben dam, between ledom, if it's like, concerning between blood and blood, it's like saying it's a very serious case. Ben Torah la mitzvah, so it's like if it's like a matter of Torah and mitzvah, lachukim umishpatim. So, whether it be like statutes or whether it be like, judgments. But wahiz hartem otham. So the term wahiz hartem otham means to like to warn or also instruct. So literally, if you go back into the Torah and the parasha of Yithro, one of the things that actually mentions there is when Moshe Rabbeinu at one point was talking to his father-in-law, Yithro, and he was like, Yithro saw him like sitting by himself and being a judge over all the people of Israel by himself. Yithro tells him like, you can't do this. This is going to hurt you and the people by doing this. What you need to do is find men who are, honorable men, who are right, like men who keep the Torah, correctly, who will listen to your instruction correctly. And you need to appoint them to be like sarim, leaders of, of thousands, leaders of 100s, leaders of 50s, and leaders of 10. And the same word that he uses to say of what they're supposed to do is this word here. He's haratem otham. So they're supposed to instruct or warn. A warning in this case is the word he's har is from the shortest, the three-letter root zahar, which means to enlighten. So when you use the word zahir, there are some situations where zahar or zahir means to like illuminate something. So what is when you teach them, what are you doing? You're illuminating something for them. You're explaining them. So someone could take a Torah, read it, and say, I don't understand what's going on here. I don't understand what this means. That seems harsh. Why does Hashem say that? Why is it written this way? Well, the idea of someone who's a leader is to instruct to the point where you're illuminating what the Torah is. That's one of the meanings of this word, he's hartem. You will illuminate them, if you will. So then we look in the book of Ezra. So Ezra 7:10 says the following. Ki Ezra hachin levavo. So Ezra prepared himself, if you will. Lidrosh et Torath Adonai vela'asot. So basically to like, almost like investigate, the Torah of Hashem, and also to like to do. And it says, Ul lamed bi Yisrael hoku mishpot. So it says that he's supposed to teach, lelamed, from the root lamed mem dalet, to teach and instruct in Israel, bi Yisrael, hok, which is like a statute, and mishpot, which is like a judgment. So again, you have a situation where Ezra's preparing himself, which would mean that he's learning Torah in order to teach Torah. So this is a leader of the community. Now, if we go a little bit further into this same idea, getting more into the idea of instruction, in the book of Mishlei, which is the book of Proverbs, in English that's what it's called. The book of Mishlei says something very interesting. It starts out by saying in verse one in chapter 1, verse 1 through 7, Mishlei Shlomo ben Dovid. So this is like almost like the example. So mashal is like an example, or almost like a parable, things like that, of Shlomo ben David, Shlomo the son of David, Melech Yisrael, king of Israel, Lada'at Chokhmah Umusar. So it's like to know, like from first-hand experience, wisdom, or knowledge, and also Musar. Musar is often kind of described almost like almost like ethics and things like that. As having like almost like a right perspective. La'avid, to understand, Imre Vina, to understand words of understanding. So the question would be, well, what are words of understanding? He just went out around the world looking at anybody's information and tried to say, okay, I'm going to understand that. No, there's something very specific. So it says lachakat musar haskel. So to like, to take like this like almost like the ethics or almost like the knowledge or the wisdom, understanding. Tzedek mishpat umeshorim. So, again, dealing with like, correctness, judgment, things like that, or like, almost like straightness of the ways. Lothet lithoim aromo lenaar da'at umizomo. So what I want to focus in on is this part here, because one of the things it says here in verse 5, it says Yishma hachom, to listen to a wise person. So amongst the people of Israel, who would be a wise person? The one who knows Torah and instructs in Torah. So this means one of the titles that sometimes is used to describe a Rav in modern Hebrew, as well as Hebrew from the last like about 1,000 years or more, is Chacham. This word here, chochom. Yosef lekach v'navon tachbulot yikneh. So basically, what he's talking about is, listening to someone who has, knowledge of the Torah and also like, the ways of the Torah and acquire, almost like acquiring that knowledge or that understanding. And then he says, lahavin mashal, to understand, like, for example, an example or, for example, a parable, litza, then it says divrei hachomim, the words of the hachamim, the words of like those who are the leaders, the teachers of the people of Israel. Vahidothom. So like, and also their achida is almost like, someone who kind of gives you like this, I could almost say like a parable almost a little bit too, where someone gives you kind of this, let's say a story where they're trying to teach you something as an example. And you look through and you kind of say, okay, well, the point that they're making through this story of how they're explaining it is this thing here, so you could take a principle from that. And he says, Yirat Adonai, Reshif Da'at. So the fear or the awe of Hashem is the starting point of like first-hand knowledge of like wisdom of knowledge. Chokhmah, wisdom, umusar, so we said earlier, awalin balzu. So there are certain types of people who reject this. So this goes into what I was saying earlier, but the people who try to claim that rabbis have this authority, they're taking it, they're stealing it, and they're doing something that's opposite with the Torah. This is the kind of thing that it's saying that these kind of people would be the first people to kind of ignore, chokhmah. Because of the fact that the king of Israel is saying that he searched out and listened to people who were wise. That people said Shlomo Melech was the wisest of all of them. But yet he's going out and listening to people who have, who's a chacham. Who are the chachamim amongst the people of Israel? The divrei chachamim. That would be people who are teaching Torah and teaching it. And teaching the way that it's supposed to be practiced and the way that it's been passed down. So then lastly, in the book of Kohelet, which is Kohelet in English, I think it's called Ecclesiastes, in chapter 12, verses 9 through 12, it says the following, and also it's like saying that the Kohelet, the person who is speaking during Kohelet, or the person who's making, which is considered to be Solomon, King Solomon, who's the Chochom, remember a wise person, like we said in the previous one, it says, Od, limad da'at at ha'om. So again, we see teaching, knowledge basically to the people. Wa'izen wahiker, to like almost like wizen is like saying someone who weighs something or balances something, and wahiker is like to investigate. Tiken here is like someone who kind of fixes something. Meshalim harbe. So it's like basically what he's advocating here is instructing people and also investigating matters, and then also like, basically setting up, things that kind of help instruct people. And then it says, Bikesh Kohelet limso divrei hefetz v'chotuv yoshar divrei hamet. So this is essentially understood to be that this Kohelet, like the Kohelet essentially comes from the word kahal, which kahal is like to gather together or to gather people together. So it's like this Kohelet is like a leader who's gathering people together. So he's like finding words of, basically divrei chayfetz and v'chotuv yosher b'divrei hamet, or words of Torah, instructions of Torah that come from Hashem, who also come from the leaders of the people of Israel. And again, it says, Divrei hachamim kador rovanot, masonrot, natoim ba'alei asupot, nitunu mero'ei achod. So essentially, what he's saying is like, there's, words of the hachamim, the words of those who are, wise in the Torah, wise in instruction. And there is not just a situation where there's like one guy or a bunch of separate people doing their own little thing. So in summary, we've looked at how the Torah gives us a number of words, that describe people who are leaders amongst the Jewish people, who are teachers of the Jewish people in Torah, who instruct. Now, the thing is that, like I said before, languages evolve and terms used to describe things evolved. And when we deal with the word Rav or Rabbi, Rabbonim, which is plural for Rab, like more than one, or Hachamim, what we're dealing with is the same concept, that a rabbi essentially, like I mentioned in my other video, is a leader in the Jewish community who is teaching people in the Jewish community. And that's literally the idea of learning Torah, studying Torah, and teaching Torah to anyone and every, any Jew and every Jew, and even, the Noahides, same thing, people who follow the Noahide laws. This is literally the job of the Jewish people. This is what we are literally, the Torah was given to us for this to be our culture. And this is something that, when you have missionaries who say these things, and pretend as if they don't have their own leaders, they ignore what I even showed in the very beginning, that the New Testament is very clear that, whoever authored the book of Matthew made it clear that the people that, supposedly they're so against, like the Pharisees, if they say, that, it says in the New Testament, sit in the seat of Moses, the authority of Moses, what they say, do it. Now, if somebody's doing the opposite, whether it be anybody of what they say, don't do what they do, but what they say, do that. So we've gone through everything here, and we've seen that, okay, for example, when people bring up these issues that, for example, someone may say, well, rabbinical Judaism. Well, first of all, I've seen a lot of people say that stuff and never define what they mean by that. Um, now you could have a problem with a particular community. You could find a problem with a particular rabbi. But, to go around and say that like rabbinical Judaism is if like all the rabbis everywhere are not following the Torah, this is false. This is utterly false. And that's why when you look at it, all you have to do, if you're a Jew listening to this and you've encountered a missionary who says these things, here's what I would say. Challenge them with that particular section of their New Testament that I brought up, about where it says that, the Pharisees, the Sophrim, those who like know the written Torah, the Perushim, those who know the traditions around the written Torah, they sit in the seat of Moses. So he gave two types of names there that are very specific to knowing the text and knowing all the traditions around the text. Those people sit in the seat of Moses. Now, there's probably every group of missionary will come up with different reasons of what that means to them because they'll focus on, oh, well, they do the opposite of what they say. According to that, it says to do what they say. Forget what they do what they say. Now, but challenge them in this way. Okay, here's the Hebrew Torah. Here are all these terms: Zakanim, Nesiim, Sarim, Rosh Levet Avotav, Pekudim. What do these terms mean? What exactly are they supposed to do? You know, you're saying that nobody taught anybody anything, that everybody just kind of did whatever they wanted. Well, that obviously is the opposite of what happens when you get a king. Because King David, if you look at in the text, it says there were situations where he was telling people like, do this, don't do that. King Solomon, same thing. There were instructions that were given there also. And it makes more sense if the Torah wants the Jewish people to excel to know the Torah and fear Hashem, for there to be a situation like we mentioned, that the Torah says constantly to teach. It literally says constantly to teach, to instruct. And this has been the history of the Jewish people. And this is one of the things that there's no other group of people who've had the Torah, the written Torah, and have gone through history for thousands of years and have taught from the text itself. When you look back through history, all you see is the three groups, as I've mentioned in different videos. You see Jews who hold by Torath Mosheh / Orthodox Jews. You see the Karaites. You see the Shomronim, and then you can weigh between those three groups who you decide makes more sense. But this is the important thing here, and I can't stress this enough. If you're watching this video, and if you are Jewish, and even if you're not, do your research. Don't buy into anything I said just because I say it. I try to show you the text as much as possible, but don't believe me. Do your own research. Ask people who know Hebrew. Ask other people who know Hebrew. Is this true? Is it understood that these titles are describing people who are not only leaders, but also people who teach? Is it true, the things that he brought up about the fact that people are being taught the Torah by different individuals and that, basically, essentially, modern day rabbis, there's a number of them, who descend from some of the people that are in the Torah. There's Jews today who descend from people in the Torah. If Jews of today are descendants of people who are mentioned in the Torah, that means that the instruction that was given at the Torah exists today. And that anyone who tells you it doesn't, they're lying. Period. So this is Ehav Ever from the Chronicles of Ehav Ever, and I hope this helps. Thank you for listening. Take care and bye.